Welcome to Equity Builds Expertise, the podcast. Because whether you teach it or build it, expertise grows where equity leads. I'm Shauna Pyatt Buckner, STEM educator, consultant, author, and the voice behind the Equity Builds Expertise framework. And after years of helping teachers, school leaders, engineers, and technical teams grow their people, I've learned something pretty simple. And that's that classrooms and companies really face some of the same challenges. And it's going to be the same solutions that change everything. So here, we're going to talk about what really builds expertise. We're talking about belonging, access, agency, clarity, communication, and those everyday decisions that actually shape how people think, learn, and collaborate. So if you're committed to growing your people, whether we're talking about students or staff, teachers or engineers, then this is the space for you. So pull up a chair, grab your notebook, and join me as we bridge the worlds between STEM education and STEM industry and build the expertise that truly lasts. This is Equity Builds Expertise, the podcast. Let's get started. Welcome back to the Equity Builds Expertise podcast, because whether you teach it or build it, expertise grows where equity leads. All right, so in the last episode, we talked about how systems shape identity, especially when it comes to who sees themselves in STEM. Today, however, we're building on that idea. Because once you understand that systems shape outcomes, then the next question becomes something like, what are we actually seeing in our students? And what are we missing? Today, I'm joined by Dr. Pamela Seda. Awesome. And this conversation challenges us to rethink how we define engagement, ability, and potential. So let's get into it. You know, I have been a fan of yours long before we even had a chance to meet. I had your book, and I am just so thankful for you to join us today. You've talked about in your book, Choosing to See, how identity, how thinking, how belonging are an essential part of teaching math and math education. And I'm really excited for us to dig into that a little bit more today. So one of the things that I wanted to start with was the fact that you have elevated the fact that rigor and care are not opposites. They're not opposites. And that idea alone challenges the way I think every single one of us even learned not only how to teach, but actually learned math. And I would love for you to tell us a little bit about what it means and what it actually looks like in classrooms when you have rigor, when you have care, and you're not compromising either one of them.
Yeah, certainly. So I want to start by talking about my definition of what equity means, because I think in this day and age, there are people who have intentionally misrepresented the concept. And so I don't want there to be any confusion about what I mean by equity. So I define equity as everyone gets what they need to be successful. Everyone gets what they need. There are people who think that equity means lowering standards so everybody can meet a standard. And I think that is the foundation of talking about how do we maintain rigorous standards as well as care. I think so much of our instruction has been teacher centered.
Mm,
And we thought if teacher does A, B, C, and D, then kids will automatically learn FGH.
mm,
That has been the understanding. So when we operate out of that idea, when we do A, B, C, and D, and students don't learn, we revert to blaming the students. Well, I
mm.
did what I was supposed to do, so something must be wrong with our students. And what ICUCARE does is changes our lens from what are teachers doing to what are students doing. And that my job as the teacher is to engage in whatever I need to do to get the students to do. That's the high expectations. That's what it means to have rigorous instruction. It's not about what I do as the teacher directly. It's really
Mhm.
about what do I do indirectly to help students do the work. They have to do the hard work of learning. And
Yes.
so to me, that means we have to really rethink all of the traditional practices and our understanding of what we think it means to be a teacher and rethink about what does it mean for students to do the hard work of learning and how do we create learning environments. That's our job as teacher. How do we create the learning environment so the students do the hard work of learning?
I love
And I
that.
don't think you can do that without holding high expectations and having warm relationships. Those two go together, which Lisa Delpic described that as being that
Yes.
warm demander.
Where do you think this binary then came from, where rigor and care, especially in math education, shouldn't be paired?
I think it started with the way that our schools were set up and how we use math.
Mm,
Our schools were never created to educate all kids to high levels. They were created to sort kids.
you're right.
And so how do we sort kids? Through competition. And so if we look at all of our systems, whether it's our grading, whether we have A through F, like why do we need three different levels of below proficient?
Mm,
Because we've used that to sort and decide who gets the good stuff. And that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy because as we sort kids and say, oh, well, only these kids deserve the good stuff, then we continue to give them the good stuff and they continue to get smarter and keep going to the top, while those who we don't give the good stuff to,
mm,
and when I say good stuff, I'm talking about the things that enable them and give them access to rigorous instruction.
that's right.
So I think that's where that dichotomy came from. It had to do with if the perception that, oh, if we care too much and we give too many students access, then we're not going to be able to play that sorting game.
Mm, mhm,
And we're going to
mhm.
give unfair advantage to students to decide who gets to the top. And what I say, because I've defined equity as every student gets what they need, I say we define a minimum level of proficiency and we make sure that every student gets over that bar. Of course, we know that there are going to be students who are going to exceed it and go farther, and that's fine. But equity said there's a minimum bar and we get every kid over it. And we don't make excuses and we don't decide that certain students are worthy of that minimum bar and other students aren't and certain students are capable. Like we remove all that. That's what equity means to me.
What should teachers stop doing immediately if they want to protect and ensure that they are doing both, right? The rigor and the care. And you kind of name some of that. It's definitely setting that standard, setting the bar, and then ensuring that everyone gets over that bar. But then it also involves creating these systems to ensure that teachers are checking where students are so that they can do what you were saying, give them what they need. And I know that your framework does an excellent job of kind of laying this out for teachers. How would you go about describing your framework in a way that helps teachers immediately see themselves and their classrooms in that framework?
Yeah, so I'll start with the very first letter of the ICU care framework. Each letter represents a principle, and that first principle is include others as experts.
Mm,
And going back to that traditional model, right? We've been telling teachers if you do A, B, C, and D, then students are going to learn. And include others as experts really helps let teachers off the hook of that they have to be the ones individually providing every kid what they need. Because when I taught high school, I had 100 kids at least easily. The
Mhm.
expectation that I'm going to be able to, as an individual teacher, individually diagnose every kid's need and be able to provide them individually what they need is unrealistic. But if I create a community of learners where
Mm.
they not only build their own expertise, they learn to support and develop the knowledge, collective knowledge of their classmates. And I structure my classroom routines around being a community of learners, then the students get to do the heavy lifting. And I then support the community, which I'm a
Mhm.
part of the community, but I'm not the only one responsible. And our traditional views of the teacher being the expert and they open the heads of kids and pour knowledge in
Mhm.
never worked to begin with.
Mm.
But the thing is, it would only work and it would be just fine if the teachers were taking the tests. Teachers
Mm.
aren't taking the tests. So to just rely on the expertise of the teacher and not develop the expertise of our students to support each other really is very short-sighted. Include others as experts. Redefine what it means to be an expert, not the person who knows the most, but anyone who can contribute to the collective knowledge of the group. Create a community of learners where everyone is not only responsible for their own learning, but contributing to the learning of their class.
I love that. That collective responsibility, right, which we know is one of the principles of Kwanzaa, is one that is so culturally ingrained, right? Especially
Yes.
in many African Americans and African communities, that I love that about your framework and that it goes back to that. And it basically says this is not just something that is intrinsic to how African American students learn. This is learning, right? When you create this learning community that supports each other and feels responsible for each other learning, then you start to shift things within a classroom. Is there a principle in that framework where you think that math educators especially need to hear, like right now?
I think there's two. I'm going to cheat a little bit because they go
All right,
together.
you're allowed. You're my guest. You get to cheat.
And so I think the U, which is understand your students well,
Ooh,
has to do with understand who your students are beyond the classroom. It's
yes.
understanding that our students are not human brains.
Mm,
They're human beings. And
yes.
there are they not only represent themselves, but they have a family that they represent. They come from a community, and that the more that we learn about those things about our students, who they are outside of the classroom, can help us teach math. Now, why is that so important? Because of neuroscience and the way the brain works.
Mm.
Rick
Let's
Wormley
go.
told me about the fact that nothing gets into long-term memory unless it's connected to something that's already there.
That's right.
So if you haven't taken the time as a teacher to understand what cultural references, what do you know about their families, how can you connect to their communities, how can you connect these abstract math concepts to things they already know? If you don't do that, then students will never retain it. That's why we see the phenomenon of I do A, B, C, and D. They got it in class. They could do it in class, and then the next day it's gone. That's
Mm,
why. Because if
yes,
you don't connect it to something that kids already know, they're going to forget it.
that's right. That's right. Wow. Wow.
And that connects to the C, which is use culturally relevant curriculum. And so, one of the reasons why our traditional practices have often failed students from marginalized groups is because we tend to favor the culture that we are from as teachers. So,
Mhm.
if I share the same cultural reference as my students, then learning takes place naturally. But let's be honest, most of us teachers, we don't come from the same generation. So there's just a
Mhm.
generation gap right there. That's a cultural
That's true.
divide.
That's true.
There's oftentimes economic divide. So if I'm teaching students who live in poor neighborhoods and I'm live in a middle class neighborhood. That's another cultural divide. So the issue is not that there are different cultures represented. The issue is that we oftentimes only emphasize our culture, things that are familiar to us. And the culture of our students who may not match our culture, they get left behind because we're not using references that they're familiar with and they're unable to connect it. So that's why
Yes.
using culturally relevant pedagogy is so important so that we can ask our students to engage in things that they're familiar with, things that make them want to do the math and not be something that's distant and not connected to reality. But the reason I say that goes with understand your students well is we can't do that well if we don't understand our students well.
That's right.
If we try to engage and create a culturally relevant task without understanding our students well, we're only going to perpetuate stereotypes.
I mean, the entire framework has a continuity that, if followed, teachers will be successful at ensuring that they create these caring communities, these communities where students feel supported, where they have the confidence and the expertise to support each other in math. You've worked with so many teachers, I don't know, thousands at this point have been exposed and have been coached and have utilized your framework. What do you see is the most misunderstood component?
I think the first C, the critical consciousness piece,
Ah,
is one of the most, I'll say, the most misunderstood
mhm.
because the way I define it is that we take the time to understand how stereotypes impact our students. And then we take action to help them overcome those stereotypes. And the
Mhm.
reason why I think that this one is often so misunderstood is because at the beginning of our interview, we talked about the traditional sense that teaching is about teachers doing A, B, C, and D.
Mhm.
Well, most teachers take critical consciousness is, well, I just need to reflect on my own biases
Mm,
and I'm not saying that's not important, but that's not
right.
enough.
That's right.
This principle is really about taking time to see how stereotypes operate in your classroom.
Mm,
They do operate in me. We
mhm.
all have biases. I need to become aware of those.
That's right.
We all are biased towards our own culture.
That's
So if
right.
I have students in my classroom whose culture is different from mine, I am biased towards my own culture. We all have
That's
biases,
right.
but that's not enough. I need to see how those stereotypes show up with my students, with each other, and how they get internalized.
That's
So many
right.
students internalize those stereotypes. And then what I do is I actively engage in activities and conversations that disrupt those stereotypes. So sometimes I say, I give shine to
Mm,
kids that I know that have internalized these stereotypes or who have been the victim of these stereotypes. And I actively choose to disrupt them in my class. And I think that is that principle is most misunderstood.
I'm so glad that you elevated this point of giving shine, creating these moments in your classroom for students and for teachers to say that I understand that I might have this bias. And because I understand that, here's the action that I must take, right? That is how we start to dismantle some
Right.
of the biases that are ingrained within how we teach and with how we instruct.
When I say give shine to students,
Yeah.
I'm saying giving shine to students for things that we value, for thinking, for that rigorous instruction, not giving them shine to say, oh, you drew that picture so well.
Right.
No, it
Or
might
right
be,
answers, or only giving right shine to right
exactly. But it
answers.
was like,
Mhm.
I really love how your picture really illustrates this mathematical principle. Can you tell me how did you come up with it? That's how you give students shine, not for compliance.
Yes, yes. Talk a little bit about gatekeeping because that's something I'm super passionate about, dismantling the gatekeeping And math has long functioned as the gatekeeper, the primary gatekeeper of students' futures, especially into STEM careers, right? And so
Yes.
if a teacher wanted to make just one instructional move that widens access while also deepening conceptual understanding, where would you want them to start?
I think the idea of gatekeeping starts with what we were talking about, that sorting, right? So it's
Yeah.
recognizing that that's where the gatekeeping starts, sorting. And
Mhm.
how do we shift that? And I
Mhm.
think one of the major ways that we engage in gatekeeping is how we use assessment, and that we use assessment to sort
Mm.
rather than using assessment to figure out what do kids already know and how do I build the prior knowledge that they need and then connect it to the new knowledge. Too many times we use assessment to provide rationalization to why kids should not have access to rigorous math.
Mm.
And we use assessment specifically for the gatekeeping, right? We're like, oh, look, they failed this test. They're not ready for
That's
on
right.
grade level. So then what we end up doing is we rationalize watered down anemic instruction.
Yes.
So what I'd say is the A part is assess, activate, and build on prior knowledge. So the first thing is assess, find out what kids know about a
Mhm.
topic, but do it in ways that does not undermine their identity as math students. And when
Yes.
I say that, don't give that diagnostic test on the first day,
Yes.
on the first day, because one is they've been away from math for a long time, and all it's going to do is just make them feel crappy. You can engage in giving them a visual diagram of the or visual representation of the topic you're getting ready to teach, and ask them, what are 5 things you notice about this image? And what's
Hmm.
one question you have?
Hmm.
And that is a way to uncover what really kids know and figure out where they are without them feeling dumb or stupid, because there is
Yep.
no wrong answer.
That's right.
Students who have internalized those negative stereotypes about their identities are really afraid of being wrong,
Yes.
because making a
Yes.
mistake reinforces those negative stereotypes in their own mind.
That's right.
So using low floor, high ceiling tasks where that are open ended and there's no wrong answer, but you're getting kids to look at the structure of the mathematics and they see things and communicate those things, describe those things.
I
That's all
love that.
assessment.
Yes.
And then you
Yes.
can use that same activity in a community setting to then activate prior knowledge. So you might do a turn and talk and say, tell me everything you remember about adding integers. And just them talking to each other, they may have forgotten something, but their
Hmm.
neighbor can remind them because they listened. And you're doing that in a way that honors their identity and not making them feel dumb or stupid. Build on prior knowledge is
Yeah.
just accept the fact that every student is not going to have the prerequisites that we want them to have. And we need to do it in a way. Firstly, we just need to, as teachers, just get over it, and don't do like I used to do early in my teaching career, have attitude, because I had
Mm.
to go back and teach them stuff I thought they should already know.
Hmm.
Second, I did things like say things like, your elementary school teacher didn't teach you how to do fractions,
Mm. Yes. Listen, I've
because
been
I thought it
guilty
was
of that
about
too.
me,
That's
right?
right.
I was
That's
thinking
right.
it was about me and rationalizing why my kids weren't learning. It was because they didn't know A, B, C, and D.
Yep.
And then I began to really question saying things like that in light of the fact of, are my students now going to be willing to put in the work and the effort it takes
Mm.
to learn those prerequisite skills after I said something like that? Of course not.
No.
And as I said, ICU care is all about getting kids to do the work.
That's right.
And saying things like that, or even my facial expression or my body language, if it communicates that I'm upset that I have to go teach this stuff, it will
Right.
shut kids down. So, what should we do
Absolutely.
instead? We should do just in time intervention, not just in case. Don't go and review
I
everything that they
love
should have
that.
learned, right? You review what they need right when they need it. So if I'm getting ready to use solve an equation where they have to do fractions, then I'll introduce the fractions then right before we solve the equation,
Hmm.
just in time, not just in case. And that was compliments of Julie Dixon.
Mm.
She came up with that phrase, just in time, not just in case.
I think this is a perfect opportunity to share something from your book that really stuck with me because what you talk about here is a unique way to make it not about us and to really make it about our getting a clear understanding of who our students are and who's in front of us. Because until we do that work, we won't know what they actually need to be successful in our class.
Absolutely.
And I love this. So one thing just to also name, what you may not know about me is that I started my teaching career and out of a fear of physics and chemistry, and wound up switching my major early on and deciding that I was going to just do English because I love to write. And so I actually was a high school English teacher for 4 years before going back to school for science so then I could finish and become a high school science teacher. And so what that has done for me is that I then realized that um, by building my students' literacy skills and building their understanding of vocabulary and writing, that I would actually create and build their expertise in science. And when I read this part that I'm about to share from your book, I was like, Dr. Seda gets it. Another reason why I was fangirling when I first met you, because I was like, I have never met anyone in STEM so connected to what I believe. But here I'm on page 75 in your book, and you say, as teachers, we also need to separate the relationship in our own minds, especially when we find ourselves reacting emotionally to students' lack of effort, knowledge, or care about the mathematics we are trying to teach them. This is what you were just talking about. Can we really separate these relationships? Because teaching is so deeply personal, we may find ourselves taking so much of what we do with our students personally, but we must try. Understanding our students well means that we know their math histories, both successes and failures, and we understand how these experiences impact the ways they currently experience mathematics. And then the next section is math story. So, how do we do this? We ask them to share their math story. When our students are opening up about their histories with mathematics, they need to know that even their teachers' relationships with math may not have always been positive. No relationship is always positive. I mean, this is 75 pages in, and while I loved everything before it, I think that part resonated with me so much because I know, first of all, everyone has a story of math. They have a history with math teachers from the very beginning. Sometimes it's the stories that they remember from their parents, stories when their parents were teaching them or their caregiver was teaching them something in math, to the first time they were embarrassed or shamed, right? In a math class. Like everyone has these stories. But what you've done here is you've said, it's not enough for the student to have the story. It's important for the teacher to know that story. What I would love for you to explain, because in many ways, this could be considered controversial in that as a math teacher, and I know definitely in science classes, I taught biology, I taught environmental science, and I know that the question that's going to come up is, so how do I fit this into the curriculum that I have to teach? You're asking me to look at journals. There's a whole other, the next page, then you go on to talk about journaling and responding to students' journal. I don't have time to do that. As a math teacher, I don't have time to do that as a science teacher or as a STEM teacher. What do you have to say? How do you coach teachers through that part, this section? Because I can see this would be the part where they're like, oh, well, now I'm done.
Yeah, so I will just say one of the things that I go on to share in that chapter is I talk about one of my students who I had as a ninth grader, and I didn't know her math story. And she failed my class as a ninth grader. And then I had her 2 years later as an 11th grader in Algebra 2.
Mhm.
And that time I did do the math story and the difference it made. And so one of the things I share that is because saying you don't have time to do it really talks about what our priorities are. And at that point in time, once I realized the difference and that what I missed out on supporting that, being able to support that student because I didn't know their math story, I didn't pay the cost, she did. And I believe that's a cost that's too high. The other thing is, unfortunately, how a capitalistic society works, if somebody said, I'll pay you $1 million for you to figure out how to do this, you'll figure out how to do it.
Mhm.
And what I found was I had no more time than anybody else. But what I did was I figured out,
Mhm.
how do I do this? So one of the ways when I first started it, I had pencil and paper and I had my students do this as an in-class assignment. I'm gonna be honest, it wasn't really to save myself time. It was really, well, I guess it was to save myself time. I couldn't read
Mhm.
what they were writing.
Ah!
I couldn't read it. So I wasn't thinking about in terms of time. I was just saying this is a waste of time altogether if I can't read what they're writing.
Yeah.
So I that was one of the first things I did is I switched it to a online assignment so that they did it digitally and submitted it to my LMS. So that's one way to save time.
Nice.
And because I'm not really worried about students cheating on their own math story, you can give it as an assignment.
Yeah.
So when I had my students as 11th graders, I actually made that their very first assignment. You're coming to
I love
class. We
that.
haven't really done a lot of math. It's assignment number one. Tell me your math story. And I gave them three prompts. My first memories of math were I used to be a good at math until, and now math is. And I just
Wow.
let it be their first homework assignment. And I
Love
didn't
that.
grade it because that's not something that you grade, but I had it. And it was something that I referred to throughout the year.
How did this assignment of having students share their math stories, like, why was that so central to building mathematical understanding and not just confidence?
I think part of it has to do with that last question that says now math is.
Mm.
It's communicating to them you're still writing your math story. Your story's not over.
Mhm.
And this class is a part of it. So it's communicating to them that, yeah, you're still writing your math story. The other part is it was for me. I'm playing a role in the story of all of my students. And the question is, what role am I going to play?
Yes.
Am I going to be Darth Vader?
Mm. Please
Or am I
no.
going to be Yoda?
Yes.
Because I don't want to be the hero. That's the thing. I'm not trying to be the hero in their story. They need to be their own hero.
Mhm.
My role should be like Yoda, who helps them see the force within and help them understand that every day that they come into classroom, we are still writing their stories
That's right.
and that I'm a part of it.
You're reminding them that they're actually the hero of their story and that you are more of just that guide that helps them to get the practice. I think of Yoda now. Now you're definitely playing on my geeky sci-fi, pulling on that thread. But that he guided, right? And he coached, and that shifts power dynamics in the math classroom. And it actually
And
starts to disrupt, right?
and before he could even do that, he had to convince him that he had the force within him. Like you have to recognize, and that's half the battle for our students is helping them understand you can do math.
That's
And
right.
what is math? Math is not getting right answers. It's noticing patterns, describing patterns, and generalizing patterns. And all
Yes.
of our brains are hardwired to notice patterns. So everyone can do math.
I love it. And then you just now led me into the second segment, second part that I truly loved in your book, which focuses on that whole idea of doing math and math doers. Um, Let me find it. Yeah, here on page 95, this is where you said effective teachers focus on engagement and not compliance. Teachers must be explicit about what it means to be a doer of mathematics. Can you tell us a little bit more about what it means to be a doer of mathematics, especially for students who've been marginalized in math spaces, right? What does it mean for them to be doers of math? And how is that different from what they traditionally get?
Yeah, so as I gave that definition, and I got that definition from Sarah Vanderwerf, who's in Minnesota,
Mhm.
it means we give students the opportunity to notice patterns, give them the vocabulary to describe what those patterns are, and then give them the opportunity to use the structure of mathematics to generalize those patterns so that they can then apply them in other contexts. That is the power of mathematics. The skill to be able to do that can carry with kids far beyond when they leave K-12 education.
That's right.
But the problem is because we have traditionally seen math as getting right answers quickly,
Mm.
most of the math that we give to students, especially those who we do not perceive as our high achievers who get the good stuff, they tend to just be given math that someone else has already done. And
Yes.
we just ask them to mimic it. So most of the math that most of our students are getting is mimicking math, not doing mathematics.
Mm.
And so our the tasks that we give kids to do communicate our expectations and our belief in them more than anything else. It's not
Yes.
about telling them what math is. It's about giving them the opportunity to do the math in community, and
That's
they
right.
will see what the math is. Give them opportunities to engage in the standards for mathematical practice, which I think is the goal. I think
I
math
love it.
content is the vehicle that we use to develop the mathematical practices in our students. That's the goal. And guess what? We have 13 years to develop it if we start kids in kindergarten.
That's right. That's right. And that goes along with Malcolm Gladwell's idea of the 10,000 hours needed for anyone
Oh,
to
yeah,
build expertise, right? Like that is outliers. That's exactly the point. I told you, all of this resonated with me because I talk about that all the time. That imagine what it would be like if we started to give students and teach students these transferable skills because you named of those three things that you named, you talked about identifying patterns, but then you also talked about giving them the vocabulary to explain it, right? And then giving them real life examples and ways to apply it. That is science. I used to tell students that math is the language of science, that most of what we've,
yes,
discovered and figured out in science, we usually have to explain using the language of math and numbers and to show that data. But we also need to
totally
make sure
agree.
that we are building their vocabulary. Like those are specific transferable skills that if we do that every single year, building expertise is it's a given. I want to talk about what this does for students' identity and for now this story that they are crafting. What happens when students internalize this new identity? What do you see for them?
Yeah, so I'm just going to back up a little bit and
Yeah.
talk about Vision 1 versus Vision 2 instruction
Oh,
and the
yes.
impact it has on students. Okay, so
Please.
Vision 1 instruction is our traditional instruction where the teacher's role is to make it as simple as possible
Hmm.
um, and to avoid mistakes at all costs and avoid confusion. Like we are
Mm-hmm.
supposed to make things simple and clear for students and avoid confusion. The problem with that is when students start to struggle, and
Mm-hmm.
everyone invariably will,
Mm-hmm.
they start to internalize those stereotypes and they start to believe I must not be a math person. And I know
Mm.
that I saw that phenomenon very early on in my teaching career, but I ascribed it to the students. I thought it was something internal in them, not
Mm.
realizing it was my instruction itself that was creating that
Yes.
phenomenon. If my job is to make math as simple as possible and to avoid all confusion, what that means is if I'm confused, then that means I must be dumb and I'm not smart.
Mm.
And so we are creating that phenomenon in our students. We are creating students who do not believe they're good in math. And it
Yeah.
starts in kindergarten. And
Yeah.
we, as we get higher up in the
Yeah.
math, we get more and more students who get off the pipeline of
That's
math
right.
because they don't believe they can do it. So what do we do instead? It's what I call Vision 2 instruction, where is the goal of mathematics is to help students wrestle with complexity in
Mm.
community to develop reasoning and problem solving skills. That should be the purpose of math, right?
Yes.
And so when you do that, when you teach in that way,
Mm-hmm.
then you normalize confusion. You understand that making mistakes, it means you're learning.
Yes.
And that because you're
Yes.
doing it in community, you have people to bounce ideas off. You learn what to do when you are confused. That
Yes.
becomes normalized.
That's right.
And so that is the impact on students to when they leave K-12 education and they're facing a problem and they're confused, they're no longer fearful. They don't internalize those negative messages.
That's
They
right.
think about, okay, what did I do before? What did my teacher teach me to do when I'm confused or what I don't understand? Because guess what? There are things I can do.
That's right. What is the advice for teachers so that they can start to help students shift and change their identities and their math stories when they come back from break, maybe even?
So I say start with the tasks. You
Mm.
communicate what you believe about your students by the tasks that you give students.
I
So
love
I say find cognitively demanding tasks. That's a place to start. And then create that community of learners that I start with cognitively demanding tasks and then go to that I chapter in the book and think about how do I create a community learner? How do I create rituals and routines in my class to where students understand that I'm not only responsible for my own learning, but I'm also responsible for contributing to the learning of others, and I can't hide.
that. Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
where I would say start. And the tasks don't even have to start out being culturally relevant. I
Yeah.
actually have a continuum. I say
Mm-hmm.
stage one, it means it's cognitively demanding. Stage
Mm-hmm.
two means you've changed the names and replaced the names with your students' names or names that are
Mm-hmm.
meaningful to your students. Notice I didn't say ethnic sounding names. I
That's right.
said relevant names. So put your students' names in there. Put the neighborhood's names, the communities, their family members, put names that they will recognize. That's stage two.
Love
Stage
that.
three, replace the context with ones that your students are familiar with. And then stage four, empower them to be agents of change. Too many times we think we're supposed to just start with a stage four task. And I say, no,
Mm-hmm.
start with stage
Mm-hmm.
one. Don't even try to make it culturally relevant. Just start with a stage one task that's cognitively demanding. Then
Yeah,
a baby step is to make it stage two.
that's right.
Then after you're comfortable doing stage two tasks, then get to stage three task. And then eventually, once you're comfortable with stage three tasks, move to stage four. But the bottom line is start somewhere. And I say where you start is with those cognitively demanding tasks.
Yeah, if you could give them a resource, teachers a resource that they should go to find some of those cognitively demanding questions or problem sets, or depending upon, of course, which math and what grade levels they're teaching, where would you send them?
Yeah, so teachers don't get to choose their curriculum,
Mm-hmm.
but I guarantee you that there's some cognitively demanding tasks in whatever textbook you have. You just have to find them. And so oftentimes I will look at the application
Mm-hmm.
section, or you may have a hot section or problem solving in your textbook. So I think that's a good place to start. Your district has invested money in those texts, and they should not be scripted to where you have to do everything line by line, but almost all of them you can find. You may have to hunt a little bit, but you can find text tasks there. That's a good place to start. Another place that I go to, and these are just some websites that I go to. I've done achievethecore.org. That's a place.
Love that.
Enrich, the letter N and RICH.
Mm.
Enrich is a website. Illustrative Mathematics. And
Ah,
these are the
yeah.
free resources that I'm telling you about. Illustrative Mathematics.
Yeah.
They have good cognitively demanding tasks. Um, Joe Bowler, her website, UCubed,
Mm.
has some good cognitively demanding tasks for all grade levels. So those are free websites that I recommend.
If there was one belief about math teaching that you wish every educator would absolutely let go of, what would it be? And what would you want them to replace it with? Mm-hmm.
Let go of the idea that only some kids are math people. Just let that go.
Yes.
And what do we replace it with? That your job is to uncover the brilliance of every kid that's sitting in your class.
Is there anything that you had hoped that I asked you that I did not ask you yet that you'd like to share?
Well, I know one of the questions we had talked about earlier was what's coming up, what's some work that
Oh, that
may
was
be
going to
coming
still
up
be
for
my last
doing.
question, but yes, go for it. Tell
Okay,
us.
yes.
Yes.
So I had the pleasure of submitting an article for NASSP, National Alliance of Secondary School Principals, their journal called Principal Leadership. And my
Oh,
article is going to appear in the March issue.
okay.
And it talks about um, why we need instructional leadership specifically for mathematics,
Yeah.
and how we can no longer afford to just delegate that to somebody else, why we have to be intentional about that so that teachers can make that shift from Vision 1 to Vision 2 instruction. So I'm really excited about that coming out
I'm
in
excited
March.
for you. Absolutely.
And then the
Great.
second thing I would share with people, if you want to stay connected with me and you
That
want
was my
to
question
get
too.
more of this information, just go to my website. You can get to it at pamseda.com is the easy way to get to it. It's actually sedaeducationalconsulting.com, but that's too much to type. So just type in pamseda.com. It'll take you to my website, and scroll to the bottom and subscribe to my newsletter. And
Perfect.
so I have a monthly blog. So you'll get that as well as a weekly newsletter.
Dr. Seda, thank you so much for your time today. I have enjoyed our conversation, and I hope that so many people listening and having the opportunity to see this really get an opportunity to not only see what the ICU care framework can do, but also see your brilliance, which I
Why, thank
totally
you.
love.
Well, I
Yes.
just want to add that while my book is sold everywhere where books are sold, you can get it anywhere. But if you purchase it from my website, it will be personally autographed by me.
Love that. Okay, before we close, I just want to sit with something that Dr. Pamela Seda reminded us of throughout this entire conversation. It's that seeing students is not the same as labeling them, and serving students is not about lowering expectations for them. It's about being willing to look deeper, to question what we've normalized, to notice brilliance that our systems sometimes overlook, and to recognize that expertise does not grow in environments where students are constantly trying to prove that they belong. One of the things that I appreciate most about Dr. Seda's work and her book, Choosing to See, is that it pushes us beyond performative conversations about equity and into relative action. Because choosing to see is active. It's choosing to see the student that stopped raising their hand, or the student whose language or culture or learning style is constantly being misread, or the student who has learned to protect themselves from failure. It's a student who's capable of far more when we redesign the conditions around learning. And honestly, it's also about choosing to see ourselves, see our own assumptions, our habits, our grading practices, our definitions of rigor, and even our willingness to change. That kind of reflection, I know, takes courage. But as Dr. Seda shared with us today, when educators lead with both rigor and care, we start to create those spaces where students don't just survive school, they start to develop confidence, identity, and eventually they will develop their expertise. So wherever you're listening from today, whether you're in the classroom or leading a school or raising children or even mentoring young people or leading teams in industry, I hope this conversation encourages you to just pause and ask the question, who might I not fully be seeing yet? And what becomes possible when I actually do? Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Equity Builds Expertise, the podcast. Now, if this conversation resonated with you, please share it with someone who believes in building learning spaces where every person has the opportunity to grow into expertise. Make sure you subscribe, leave a review, even just leave an emoji or something, and stay connected. Now, in the next episode, I'm coming back solo actually, for a really practical conversation around what it means to build access. Because sometimes the biggest barriers in learning are the skills that we assume students already have, but never explicitly teach. I will see you next time, because whether you teach it or build it, expertise grows where equity leads. See you next episode.